Eruvin, Daf and Mem Zayin through Nun Gimel, Daf Mem Zayin. The Gemara brings a Mishnah. Hayuvama lo tachlos lo tisyabe machyu lo shlosha chadashim. Hayuvama, a woman whose husband died and has to do either Yibum or Chalitza, she should not do either until 3 months have passed from the death of her husband. And this is actually a general halacha. All women should neither do Nisuin nor Erisin until 3 months have passed from the death of their husband. This is true regardless of whether they have been physically intimate with the first man or not. The Tanna Kama says, Echad Basulos, Echad Beulos, Echad Almanos, Echad Grushos, Echad Arusos, Echad Nisuos, regardless of whether there's any chance that they have conceived a child from the first man, this halacha applies. The reason for this is because we want to make sure that we know who any subsequent child, who the father will be. If she's with two men within 3 months, because pregnancy is not visible until 3 months, Chazal say we won't be sure who the father is. Therefore, she has to wait 3 months before remarrying. And even in cases where we know she's not pregnant, the Tanna Kama says, nevertheless, this Isser applies. There's actually a discussion in the poskim whether the Isser in question is Daraisa, Drabanan, and Yevamas. The Gemara brings two reasons for this Isser. It brings a pasuk, and then it brings a concern that if we're not sure who the parents of the child are, who the father of the child is, it can lead to certain problems of erva, Yibum and Chalitza. Some say Drabanan, some say Daraisa. Some say it depends on the two different reasons given in Yevamas. Either way, there's an Isser. There's an Isser of remarrying within 3 months, and according to the Tanna Kama, it applies across the board, even if there's no chance that she's actually pregnant. Rabbi Yehuda says, Nesuos yisarsu, arusas yinasu. He says no, as long as one of the two husbands is only Erisin, either the first marriage is only Erisin, so she's certainly not pregnant from the first husband, or the current marriage is only going to be Erisin, she's waiting for the Nesuin, so there's no chance that the second husband is going to be the father if the pregnancy shows soon, and if it doesn't, we know it's not the first husband. In those cases, there's no problem. He doesn't hold of this low plug. Then we have Rabbi Yossi Shita that says, Kol Nashim Yisarsu, Chutz Min Almana V'Pnei Ha'ibel. Women can, in general, do Erisin, except when there's a question of Avelis, but women can do Erisin again because he doesn't hold of the low plug, at least in this context. How do we paskin? So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yochanan said, Halacha Rabbi Yossi, leniently. The Gemara's discussion is that if we have a general klal, the Gemara is discussing a general rule that we paskin like Rabbi Yossi. Why would Rabbi Yochanan have to say specifically Halacha Rabbi Yossi? So the Gemara goes back and forth. So the Gemara says, well, here there's a svar that we might have paskin like Rabbi Meir, because Halacha Rabbi Meir b'gzeirosav. We generally paskin like Rabbi Meir when it comes to gzeiros. So here, Rabbi Meir, the Tanna Kama, has a gzeira that no one can marry, not Erisin, not Nesuin, not an Arusa, not a Nesua. You might think you're paskin like him, b'gzeirosav. So Rabbi Yochanan told you, no, here we paskin leniently like Rabbi Yossi. Despite that, however, we do not actually paskin like that statement of Rabbi Yochanan, like Rabbi Yossi. We actually paskin like Rabbi Meir. We paskin in Shulchan Aruch. Any woman who gets divorced or widowed can do neither Erisin nor Nesuin until she has 90 days have passed. 90 days is exclusive of the day of the divorce or death and the day of the new marriage. You need 92 days. We actually write this when we when we execute a get, execute a divorce for a woman, and we give her a authorization from the basement to remarry. We write, so-and-so is now divorced. He and she, the husband and wife, can now both remarry, but they have to wait 92 days. They have to wait 3 months, exclusive of the day of the divorce. This is Gzeira. Shulchan Aruch calls it Gzeira. And even if she's not able to conceive, even if she's physically not able to conceive, even if she's only an Arusa, you always have to wait these 90 days. In addition to the basic halacha of not remarrying, poskim have extended this general concern that it's critical to know who the parents of a child are. So poskim have extended this to other contexts. So the Chasam Sofer, followed by contemporary poskim, Chasam Sofer discusses a case of adoption. Essentially adoption. Somebody was contemplating raising a child that wasn't his biological child as his own. There was actually a question, the earlier Acharon discussed, the child may have been swapped at birth, and so one chassid argued, what does it matter? So raise him as your own. He is your child. He's not your child. He'll be your child. You'll raise him as your own child. Who cares about his biological parents? Chasam Sofer says, no, we have these various concerns. The Gemara says it's important to know who a child's true father is, who a child's parents are. The Gemara in Yevamas lists various concerns. One concern is he may wind up marrying an erva. If he thinks that his adoptive parent is his father, he may meet a girl who actually is his biological sister, and he won't know it, then he'll marry her, and it can lead to erva, other concerns by yibum and chalitza. So the Chasam Sofer says that you have to make sure it's important al pi halacha for us to retain knowledge and records of who a child's parents, who his father really is. Contemporary poskim, the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Minchas Yitzchak, Moshe Feinstein, and others have stressed that it's important that when you adopt a child, you cannot raise the child as your own child biologically. You cannot hide the fact of his adoption because it can lead to the various problems in the Gemara. Now, Ramosha and others have said that you don't have to tell the child right away when he's a little kid. You don't have to tell him that he's adopted. You can wait till he grows up. Ramosha explains you don't have to worry that the parents will die before they have a chance to reveal the secret, then it'll go down with them in the grave. You can assume that you'll be in a position to tell him later, but you do have to have plans, at least when he grows up, to tell him that he's adopted. The same concern the Gemara has here, because it's important that we know who a child's true parents really are. This was also this point was also at the root of a famous dispute between Rav Moshe Feinstein and other poskim regarding assisted reproductive technology. When they were going to use artificial insemination via donor sperm, not the husband's sperm, Rav Moshe allowed it. It wasn't the first choice, but Rav Moshe allowed it in certain cases. Other poskim were vehemently opposed. We're talking about a married woman who has a husband, but she can't become pregnant with him, so they want to use donated sperm from a donor, not her husband. So Rav Moshe felt that in principle we can allow it. In certain cases we could allow it. Other poskim, notably Rabbi Yaakov Breish and some of the Hasidic poskim, were very upset about this lenient ruling. One of the halachic concerns, besides the squeamishness about erva and about tampering with marriage, one of the specific halachic concerns they raised, or Breish raised, was you have this concern. You're not going to know who the father is. If the donor, sometimes I guess you can have an open donation where you know who the father is, but if you don't know who the father is, it can lead to the concern of the Gemara that it's important to preserve information about paternity, because if you don't know, it can lead to these problems of erva. Rav Moshe agreed that it was important. In the adoption shuvas, he certainly felt it was important. But here he felt you could be lenient. In the U.S., he said, because most donors are non-Jews, and therefore the various erva problems won't arise if the father is a non-Jew. The problems in the Gemara are always if the biological father is a Jew. If the biological father is a non-Jew, then he doesn't have any halachic relationship to him, so it isn't a problem. So Rav Moshe held it was okay. At least in the U.S., in a country that was mostly not Jewish, you could follow Rov and assume that the problems in the Gemara don't apply. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara is still discussing different disputes between Rabbi Yossi, other Tanaim. So the Gemara brings a halacha that a Kohen who's normally prohibited from becoming Tameh Meis, certain cases they allowed him to become Tameh. The Gemara says, Tumah Daraisa, basic Kvaros, the reasons the Gemara is giving to allow Tumah, there are important reasons, but they wouldn't suffice to allow the Kohen to do an Isser Daraisa. So the Gemara explains, we're talking about Tumah Drabanan, Besa Pras, which is a kind of Tumah Drabanan, going into Chutz La'aretz, which is a din of Tumah Drabanan. So for certain important considerations, they allowed a Kohen to become Tameh Midrabanan. Included in those reasons are Lisa Isha, to get married, Lilmod Torah, to study Torah. Now we have a machlokes. Rabbi Yehuda says this is only if he can't learn Torah where he is in Eretz Yisrael without becoming Tameh. But if he can learn Torah locally, then he shouldn't travel to Chutz La'aretz to learn Torah and become Tameh. Rabbi Yossi says doesn't matter. Even if he has an opportunity to learn Torah locally, he can still travel. Why? He can still become Tameh Midrabanan. Why? She'ein min hakol zochad and lilmod. A person cannot always learn from any Rebbe, from any yeshiva. Sometimes his success is contingent on a certain yeshiva, a certain teacher. So if he feels he needs to go there, even if he has another opportunity locally, that's a good enough reason to allow Tumah Drabanan. Rabbi Yochanan says, Halacha Rabbi Yossi, this time we do actually paskin like Rabbi Yossi. Shulchan Aruch says in Yeridea, even though a Kohen can't become Tameh normally, even Drabanan, but Lisa Isha, Lilmod Torah are good reasons. And even if you have a local opportunity to learn Torah, still you can become Tameh Midrabanan. The Trumas Hadeshin draws an interesting conclusion from this Shita of Rabbi Yossi. The Trumas Hadeshin discussed a case of a student who wanted to leave the country to travel abroad to learn Torah from a certain Rebbe, that he felt he would be very successful learning Torah from him. The father was very nervous. The father said that it was dangerous there, that if he goes to that the conditions, political, social conditions it was unstable there, the son would be in danger. Father said, I'll really worry about you. I'm going to suffer greatly worrying about you in that place. So please don't go. So the son wanted to know, should he respect his father's wishes and not travel to learn Torah? He had an opportunity to learn Torah locally, but he felt he'd be particularly successful abroad at this other Rebbe. Trumas Hadeshin says he does not need to listen to his father. And he brings a raya from our Gemara. He says, we paskin like Rabbi Yossi, that loman kaladam zalcha lilmud. A person can't necessarily learn from Torah from anyone. Even if on paper he has a local opportunity, it doesn't matter. She'ein min hakol zalcha adam lilmud. And he goes on, he proves that you see in our Gemara that the heter of lilmud Torah applies even in such a case where you have an opportunity and it's only because of ein min hakol zalcha adam lilmud. And he says, therefore, that Talmud Torah is more important than Kibbud Avim. Yaakov Avinu, the Gemara tells us, was not punished. He was punished for the years he stayed at Lavan's house, but he was not punished for the years he spent at Shem Ve'ever's yeshiva, because learning Torah, not punished for his having neglected his obligation of Kibbud Avim, his parents, because learning Torah is more important. And since our Gemara, we pass like Rabbi Yossi, that Ein min kakol zelchat lilmud, that itself overrides Kibbud Avim, and that's a good enough reason to travel against his father's wishes. Daf Mem Ches, the Gemara is discussing the share of Arba Amos in the context of Tchum and elsewhere. So the Gemara says, Rabbi Yehuda explains that the source of that a person has a basic 4 Amos. A person gets 4 Amos even before you start, even in the absence of any Tchum of 2,000 Amos. A person always gets 4 Amos. What's the source of that 4 Amos? Gufo Shalosh Amos. A person's body, a person's height is 3 Amos tall. One extra amma to move an item from his feet to his head. There's a major machlokes rishonim. When we say that a person's height is 3 amos, do we mean his full height from head to toe is 3 amos? And when the Gemara says take an object and put it by his head, we mean, I guess, put it above his head. The 3 amos end at his head, and then he has 1 more amma to put it near his head. Or the other Rishonim say 3 amos is until a person's shoulders. Tosa says Hadam Arhacha Gufa Gimal Amos Hainu below Rosho. A person is 3 amos to not including his neck and head. Just his shoulders is 3 amos, and his head is neck and head are the head and shoulders are the head and neck are the 4th amma. This is a major Machos Rishonim. There are a number of Rishonim on both sides. Various later Achronim have suggested that whether we assume that 3 amos is the height of a person to his shoulders, excluding the neck and head, or all the way to the tippy top of his head, would have an impact on the share of an amma. Poskim have disagreed significantly as to how long an amma is. Whether an amma, the lower end is around 1.5 feet, the upper end, the higher end is about 2 feet, and some Achronim have suggested. The Sefer Minchas Baruch, later Achronim have suggested that these two opinions on how long an amma is would really depend on this machlokas. That a person, according to one author, a person is about 5. An average height is about 5 feet, 6.9 inches, about 170 centimeters. If that's the case, so if 3 amos is his entire height from head to toe, an amma would be then an amma would be a third of that, be about 57 centimeters, which would be about 1 foot 10 plus inches, about 22 plus inches, which is close to the high end shiurim of 23, 24 inches. But if we say that the 3 amos are only to the shoulders, the average height of a person is only about 140 centimeters to the shoulders, about 4 feet 7.1 inches. Then the amma works out to about a third of that is about 46 centimeters, which is about 1.5 feet, which is about 1 foot and 6 plus inches. These are the shiurim that are relevant everywhere, relevant in Eruvin, relevant Arba Minim. We're going to take the lulav and the hadassim, and you'll see on the hadassim packages they say Meshulosh Kulo or Meshulosh Rubo, Shir Chazanish or Shir Grachna. The Chazanish and Grachna are the 2 opposite ends of the amma. The Chazanish has the much longer amma, and then some have suggested it would really seem to depend on whether we assume when the Gemara says the height of a person is 3 amos, is that to the shoulders or is that to the head? If it's to the head, then the amma is much longer. If it's to the shoulders, then the amma is obviously much shorter. They ask, however, that it's really hard to say that the larger ammas, that a person is 3 ammas to the top of his head, is really hard because an amma is basically from the tip of the middle finger to the elbow. That is simply less. If you look at how tall a person is, that's simply less than a third of his top of his head to his feet. So, it's always possible that people changed heights since the time of Chazal, but to say they changed proportions too, that we tend to have shorter and stubbier arms and they had longer arms, is a bit much to swallow. So this is a major debate about how long an amma is. But one way to approach the question is through our Gemara, through this dispute as to whether the 3 amma height of a person is to the shoulders or to the top of the head. On Daf Mem Tes, the Gemara talks about you have a chatzer and you have 2 mavos, and the people in the chatzer are typically passed through one mavoi, not the other mavoi. So the Gemara has various dinim about whether the chatzer needs to make an eruv together with the mavoi or not. The Gemara brings a statement: Im irva regila la'atzmo v'zeh she'ena regila bo lo irev. If the regila, where the chatzer normally passed through, made their own eruv and they didn't make an eruv together with the people in the chatzer, but the ena regila didn't make an eruv at all, and the chatzer didn't make an eruv at all, so now we have a problem. Because naturally the chatzer would be considered together with the regila, the mavoi it normally passes through. If so, their eruv wouldn't work because some members didn't make an eruv, the people in the chatzer didn't make an eruv, so they would all be us, so their eruv would be foiled. Other people didn't make an eruv anyway, so nobody would be able to carry. But if we could somehow redirect the chatzer to the ena regila, then they still won't be able to carry, and the ena regila won't be able to carry, but at least the regila will be able to carry, because the chatzer is redirected to the ena regila. So that's what we do. We say, Dochenos eitzel she'ena regila, even though they normally go through the regila. Here we tell them to associate with the ena regila. Why? Because kofin al midas don't. In terms of, it's not a zero-sum game. In terms of the laws of Eruvin, if they go with their natural regila partners, everyone loses, nobody can carry. If they go to the ena regila, they still can't carry, and the ena regila still can't carry. At least the regila could carry. So that they have nothing to lose, and the regila stands to gain. We say, kofin al midas don't. Why be a stone person who says, if I can't have it, nobody can? You shall at least want someone else to have something. Kofin al midas don't. This principle that kofin al midas don't, we compel people to behave in such a way that if it doesn't matter to them, but it could be beneficial to somebody else, we force them to act accordingly, because kofin al midas don't, there is a major debate in Rishonim and Achronim when that applies. Is that really true, that we force people to accommodate others, to allow people to use their property, to allow somebody to squat in your house if you're not occupying it, assuming even if they'll clean up and everything? You have a sukkah, you're not using it. Can someone just walk in without permission and eat there for a couple of hours? He'll be very clean, he'll clean up, he'll hand sanitizer and alcohol and bleach and no coronavirus, everything will be fine. He'll leave it spotless, it doesn't bother you anyway. You have the right to object. So there's a major dispute about this. The Marsham, for example, summarizes the literature. The Marsham had a case of someone has to do some construction, and to reach the roof, to reach his property, he has to extend a ladder. The ladder will have to cross the property line and rest on his neighbor's property. It won't tear up any bushes, it won't cause any damage, it's temporary. Other than that, it'll be difficult or impossible for him to do the work on his own property. Can he force his neighbor to accommodate him? The Marsham says it's not so clear. He brings a machlokes rishonim about this very case of the ladder. It's machlokes rishonim whether you can force somebody to allow you to place a ladder on his property. He goes back and forth, and he says that the neighbor can say kimli. It's machlokes rishonim. You can't force him to accommodate you because it's a suffix, and the burden of proof is on us. We can't force him to allow us to use his property. He can say kimli. The Professor Nachum Rockover, in an interview to Rabbi Frankfurter in Ami Magazine years ago, someone asked him he's an expert in Mishpat Ivri, comparative law, Jewish law, non-Jewish law. Someone asked him, what's the unique distinctiveness of Jewish law? He said, Jewish law goes beyond the legalistic letter of the law. The same Shulchan Aruch has Lefnim Mishur Sadin, going beyond the letter of the law, and Midas Dom. It has the idea that we do force people in some cases not to behave in a Midas Dom fashion. He tells the story of a case in Baston. Someone needed to get a delivery, and the way to do it was through the neighbor's house. And again, there was no harm to the neighbor, but the neighbor wasn't happy with it. And the Baston Paskin kofin al midas dom. And you have to do it. It doesn't harm you, and it helps the neighbor significantly, so you have to do it. And he told this to a lawyer, and the lawyer said, what kind of a court can rule like that? Maybe in Western law they can't. But in halacha, we say, at least in some cases, as per our Gemara, we say kofin al midas dom. Tzitz Eliezer of Waldenberg has a letter to Rabbi Dr. Avram Sofer Abraham about copying from a sefer, a Torah book, or a medical article, a medical journal, You want to copy it for personal use. A student wants to copy it for his own study. Copyrighted. No part of this work may be reproduced by any means, mechanical, optical, electronic, and so on. You have to respect this copyright. So Rav Waldenberg has various arguments about discussion of how halacha relates to copyright law, intellectual property. One of his arguments for being lenient in this case is Kofen al Midas Dom. He says that if this is not a commercial use, he says, even though they say that you can't copy anything no matter what, he says that assuming it's out of print, they already sold all their copies. They have a back catalog. They might want to reissue it at some point. Today, you can go to Springer or these websites. They want to charge you for every article you want to download. They do want to charge you for it, but Rav Waldenberg is assuming that it would be midas dom for them to object at this point. If it's not in print, if it's not an ongoing commercial enterprise, then it would just be midas dom for them to object, he says, and therefore kofen al midas dom. Again, a lot of assumptions here that there's no possibility of them profiting. Maybe the next time they issue the same journal, maybe future issues of the journal, they'll sell more copies if people don't copy articles. So I don't know, but that's Rav Waldenberg's position, that in some cases at least we can justify what would seem to be a copyright violation via the argument of kofen al midas dom. Complicated discussion. This is not the last word on the subject. On Daf Mem Tes and Daf Nun, the Gemara talks about a case of someone who is traveling, he's on his way, and he sees a tree in the distance, and he tries to establish his shvisa. He wants to be kona shvisa under the tree. The problem is the tree is wide, and there are different points in the tree. So the Mishnah says that lo amar klum, it doesn't work. My lo amar klum, the Gemara says, what does it mean it doesn't work? Rav says lo amar klum at all, and Shmuel says that it works, but you're kona under the tree. It's just not clear exactly where under the tree. So we have the idea of chamar gamol that you have to go l'chumra both ways. If you want to travel to the east of the tree, maybe he was kona shvisa on the west of the tree, so you only get 2,000 amas to the east from the west of the tree. If you want to travel to the west of the tree, maybe he was kona shvisa on the east part of the tree, so he only gets 2,000 amas from the east of the tree. So he can only travel in the area that's 2,000 amas from all points of the tree. So there are different shittas in the Rishonim, but basically Shmuel says you are kona shvisa in an indeterminate, unspecified place, and you have to be machmer. You can only travel in such a way that wherever you kona shvisa, you're within 2,000 amas. And Rav says lo amar klum. Why lo amar klum? The Gemara brings two reasons. One reason is either because lo mesaima, that the halach in Eruvin, if you don't specify exactly where Rav holds, you're not kona shvisa at all. And the other idea is that anything that wouldn't work b'zeach or zeh doesn't work at the same time. Since if you try to be kona shvisa twice in different parts of the tree, it wouldn't work. So if you try to be kona shvisa all over the tree in one shot, that doesn't work either. But Shmuel says it does work, and it's just not clear where. And even Rav, if not for his specific concerns, would also agree that you're kona shvisa in an indefinite, indeterminate place, and you would be chamar gamel. This is a very interesting situation. Unlike most fakers we encounter in halacha, where there's a clear, well-defined truth out there, we're just not sure what it is, that you don't know. You're not sure how much meat, you're not sure, meat got mixed together with kosher and treif meat, you're not sure which is which. Most in Eruv we had earlier in the Masechta, if an Eruv gets destroyed, you're not sure when it happened, before Ben Hashmashos, after Ben Hashmashos, all kinds of sfeikus that we have. In general, we assume there's a well-defined, objective, concrete truth, and we're just not sure what it is. In these cases, where the suffix it's inherently undefined. If you say my shvisa should be under the tree, and you don't say where, according to Shmuel it works, we're just not sure where. Even Rav agrees we would say that except for his various concerns. So what happens here is simply a suffix which is irreducible. There is no way of saying that the real truth is X. How is there real truth? God is not spinning the dice, as they discuss in the context of quantum physics. Nobody's spinning dice. Nobody's rolling dice. It's just inherently a suffix. An unusual type of suffix. Rav Shimon Shkop explains this is different from other sfeikus where there's a clear objective truth. This is just a halachic state of suffix. It's an irreducible suffix. Nothing more can be said about it. Interesting halachic application. Case we were once discussing 10, 15 years ago. We're discussing a case where somebody was buying aravas for sukkahs, and he paid for two, and he took three. He took an extra one more than he paid. So that's not his. He didn't pay for that one. The case we had, someone bought 10 and actually took 11. We found a journal article in the journal Kol HaTorah by Rabbi Uriel Eisenthal. Somebody paid for 2 and took 3. So one of them is not his. So the question is, he can't contact the vendor, it's already sukkahs, he can't get in touch with them, can he simply use all three of them and saying, at least two of them are mine? So I'll take all three, and whichever one is mine, I'll be yotze. Rabbi Eisenfeld tries to argue, maybe not, he says. If two of them would actually be yours, they got mixed together with one that's not yours, just take all three, whichever two are yours, you'll be yotze. But he says in this case, where you paid for two and you picked up three, it's like Gemara. There's an undefined state of suffix. There is no concrete answer out there somewhere in the mind of God. This one is yours and this one is not yours. It's simply undefined. Rabbi Eisenfeld therefore feels that in such a case you can't be yotze at all, even if you take all three, because you can't just say whichever two are really mine, those two I'm yotze with. He feels for some reason that doesn't work at all. I'm not sure why he says that. It may be based on Rav Shimon Shkop's explanation that it's just a defined state of suffix. But even so, we have Argamar. Argamar talks about the Lachmei Toda. There is such a thing as saying 40 are Kadosh, and I'm not saying exactly where they are. You can be Kadosh Visa under a tree, according to Shmuel, even if I don't know where it is. After Machmer, I have to be Choshesh for the worst case scenario. But there is such a thing in Halacha as creating an undefined situation. Gemara in Kedushin talks about if you marry one of 5 women, and you don't specify exactly which one, so you're married to one of them, but we don't know which one. You have to give a get to all of them. But there is such a thing in halacha as an undefined state. He doesn't mean that you're kona half of each arava. That's not what happens. You're kona 2 aravas, you just don't know which 2. So they're out there somewhere. So the pashtus is, as long as you take all 3, you're yotze, and you just have to give one back to the mocher or pay him for that extra one after Yom Tov. The Gemara on Daf Nun Aleph, the Gemara says that the Gemara is discussing the idea that if, again, people want to be Kona Shvisa in a certain spot, not where they are, but somewhere down the road. So if you recognize a spot, if you have a specific spot in mind, you can say, I want to be Kona Shvisa there, assuming you're Messiah exactly where. If you don't know the area, you can say, my friend knows the area, so I give my Shvisa over to him. I'm with him. So wherever he's Kona Shvisa, I want to be Kona Shvisa too. The Gemara has a story like that on Daf Nun Aleph. Rabba and Rav Yosef were traveling. Rabba says, we want to be Kona Shvisa over there. And Rav Yosef said, I don't know where there is. So he says, don't worry, I have a brisa that Rav Yosef says, you can just say you're relying on me and you can transfer your Shvisa to me and I'll take care of it. The Gemara concludes, there's actually no such brisa. Rav Yosef never actually said that. But he told an untruth. He falsely stated Rav Yosef holds like that because he wanted to persuade him that it was right. So he told him it's a reliable halacha. It's not just me. You might not trust me, but it's Rabbi Yossi. It wasn't actually true. It wasn't actually Rabbi Yossi. Rather provocative story. The Magen Avram paskins like this. The Magen Avram says this is a generally correct rule that if you heard a certain din and you think it's correct lahalacha, you're allowed to falsely attribute it to a certain adam gadol that you know people respect and will accept his ruling, in order to get your din accepted. So you're allowed to lie in order to make sure that people accept the halacha. You can lie and misattribute halachas. A very disturbing halacha, how even if in principle that can be true, but the whole system breaks it. How can you trust anybody saying anything if you know that the end justifies the means? If you know that you're allowed to lie just to make sure people accept your halacha, then the whole system breaks down. So in the Sefer Heir Yosef Bikuach Nefesh, he says that he asked Rav Chaim Kanievsky this question, apparently. He says, how can you believe halachas that people quote in the name of an Adam Gadol? The Magen Avram says you're allowed to lie, so the whole system breaks down. He says Rav Chaim Kanievsky told him, it's true, Rav Chaim Kanievsky, ironically, is one of the ones about whom there exists a tremendous amount of debate about what he said. People quote him all the time. There's always debate about what he actually said. So Rav Chaim Kanievsky said, it's true that the halakha is you're allowed to lie and say an Adam Gadol said it, but once they accept what you said, you then have to tell them it wasn't actually the Adam Gadol. Not sure how that answers the question, even if you tell them after the fact, but again, the whole system still breaks down, because anytime someone tells you, I heard Rabbi so-and-so say X, your first reaction is mistrust. Immediately, that maybe you're doing that thing where you're lying and you're waiting till I accept the halakha, and then you'll tell me it's not really him. So I don't know how it answers the question. But that's Rav Chaim Kanievsky's, ostensibly, assuming we believe what people are saying in the name of Rav Chaim Kanievsky, that's what he held. You're allowed to lie, but you have to eventually at least reveal the truth. I saw this brought down in the Sefer Pedus Yaakov, Dover B'Shem Amro. He brings another halacha from a Sefer, Shal T'Shuas Beis Naftali, another qualification of this, or an extension of this actually. In a case where you're allowed to lie and misattribute a halacha to an Adam Gadol, if someone then goes and asks the Adam Gadol, is it true? The Adam Gadol, did you say it? The Adam Gadol has to say yes, even though he never said it. He has to play along with the story. I have a very hard time understanding that. Why, just because this person was allowed to lie, I have to cooperate, I have to lie and say I said things that I never said? That's what one Sefer says. On Daf Nun Beis and Gimel, Mishnah starts on Daf Nun Beis, the beginning of Perek Ketzin Ma'avrin, discussing how we calculate the dimensions of cities for the purpose, the borders of cities for the purpose of calculating Tchumen. So the Mishnah gives us a basic rule that the cities can be irregular, they're not neat squares all the time. The city can have houses sticking out, extending past its basic edge. The halacha is that the Mishnah explains, we go to Ketzin Ma'avrin Esarim. Ma'avrin, the Gemara has different pshat in what the word means, like a pregnant woman with a belly that extends. How do we deal with cities that extend out past their straight line? So the basic rule is that if it has houses within 70 amos or so, the Gemara is going to discuss, the Rashi brings, within 70 amos or so of the edge of the city, you square off the city based on those bumps. So a single bump will mean that we extend, not just that we draw a line around that bump, we draw a straight line. So if the house is 50 amos from the edge of the bulk of the city, the entire city now has its border extended out another 50 amos, and then you start counting the 2,000 from there. The Gemara is going to discuss this type of question of how you ma'aber cities at greater length on Daf Nun Hey. But here the Mishnah right away gives us the basic rule that we extend the city past houses. We can even chain the houses. We go, if each one is within 70 amos of the previous one, each one keeps extending the edge of the city. Cities are square, not circular. So we go to the last house and draw a line, and we end up with a square that the square pushes out the borders of the city to the edges of the last houses in this chain from the city proper. Again, the Gemara is going to have more halachas about this in a couple of dafim on Daf Nun Hey. On Daf Nun Gimel, the Gemara brings a lot of Agadata. The Gemara brings Rabbi Yochanan, Liban shel Rishonim kepischo shel Ulam. The hearts, the minds, the intellects of the earlier generations were like the door of the Beis HaMikdash, which was 10 amos by 20 amos. Achronim, the later generations, pischa shel Heichel. I'm sorry, the Ulam was 20 by 40 amos. The Heichel was only 10 by 20 amos, smaller. The Anu, we are only Kimelo Nekev Machat Tzidkis. We're like the eye of a fine needle. We're tiny. We're minuscule compared to the earlier generations. The Gemara goes on that other picturesque metaphors. Abaye says we're like six of Beguda Gemara. We're like a peg in the wall when it comes to studying Torah. It doesn't go in. You have to jam it in. It doesn't go in easily at all. Rava said we're like Etzbata Bekira L'Svara. We're like a finger in wax. It doesn't go in easily. It doesn't bring out anything from the wax. Rabashi says we're like Etzba Sababira L'Shik. We're like a finger in a pit. There's no, it can go in easily. The stuff just goes in one ear and out the other, so to speak. So the Gemara makes the point that the earlier generations were far greater than us in the study of Torah. There are conflicting Gemaras as well. There are other Gemaras we had back in Brachas that one of them, Aram, said that the earlier generations were not greater than us, even though they had more Yerei Shemayim and they were Moshe Nefesh for Kedushas Hashem, and they were greater tzaddikim, but we actually know more Torah. But this Gemara is often quoted by the Chachmei Torah as being the norm, the archetype that earlier generations were presumed to be greater in the study of Torah. And it wasn't just referring to one specific period of earlier generations. The Ran basically establishes the popularly held doctrine of Yeridas Hadaros, that there is a presumption that later generations know less, are less great in Torah than earlier generations. He says, because Torah study is a chain of transmission, each one studies from the previous Chacham, and therefore he says that that's why each generation is less, that the reason Moshe was the greatest Navi and so on, it's true for Nevuah, it's true for Chachma, he says, wisdom and prophecy, not that Moshe was the greatest, not because Hashem arbitrarily, he says, deprives later generations, but because that's necessarily true, that's the way it is, he says, that in a chain like this, he says, each one which is a consequence of the previous one, each one derives its wisdom from the previous one. So there's a natural degradation, there's a natural loss in each generation. That's why each one is less than the previous one. On the other hand, the halacha in general is that it is generally permitted for later generations, later chacham, to disagree with earlier chachamim, We don't disagree with the Talmud, special case, but in general, in principle, the Rishonim and Achronim tell us later generations, later authorities have the right to challenge earlier authorities. How does that square with the idea that we recognize they were greater? One famous approach is expressed in a letter, in a tshuva of Rabbi Yeshaya Hazaken Ditrani, the author of the Tosfos Rid. He disagreed with some of the venerable Balei Tosfos, and people challenged him. How can you think you're smarter than them? He says, Chas v'shalom, even when I disagree and I think I'm right, it's not because I think I'm smarter. Certainly, he says, I know that they're greater, and he quotes a parable of the philosophers, apparently non-Jewish philosophers, the famous parable of the dwarf on the shoulder of the giant. The philosopher was asked, how can you challenge earlier authorities? He says, the giant sees farther than the dwarf because he's higher up, so he has a broader horizon. However, he says, when the dwarf sits on the shoulder of the giant, he can see farther because he leverages all the height of the giant plus a little bit of his own. He can see farther than the giant. So we too, he says, we're not greater inherently than the earlier generations, but we have the benefit of all their wisdom, all they taught us, and we study all that, and we add a little bit of our own. Sometimes we can see further than the earlier generations. The Gemara goes on. The Gemara says, Ravina said, Bnei Yehuda, the Golum Masechta, they were Golum Masechta, they revealed the Masechta, Niskayma Tarasan, their learning was more successful, more durable. Bnei Golil, the people in the area of Golil, Lo Golum Masechta, they did not reveal the Masechta, Lo Niskayma Tarasan B'yadam, their Torah was less durable. What does that mean? Rav Yaakov Emden says it's telling you about pedagogy. He says they would give their students advance notice. They would tell them what to prepare. They would tell them what Masechta they would learn. So the students would prepare the material beforehand. So then when they learned it with their teacher, they would grasp it. They would know what to ask, what questions they had. A student who comes in prepared to the lecture will understand the Torah and learn it in a much better way than someone who comes in cold without knowing anything about the topic. Similarly, when they started a Masechta, they would go methodically. They would go straight. They wouldn't jump to another Masechta until they finished the first one. So everyone would know what they had to prepare. So according to Rav Yaakov Emden, the Gemara is telling us that the way to study Torah properly is by putting some thought and some preparation and some system, not just haphazardly coming in and teaching. It's always good to learn Torah, but if you do some planning and some foresight, it can be much more effective, and that's what the Gemara means, that those who are Golum Masechta will be Niskayma Tarasan B'yadam, and those who are Lo Golum Masechta, the Torah that they study will not be as durable.